Welcome to the Smart Connector, the podcast that helps entrepreneurs be the leader their ideal people love. Build your influence, wealth and success, attract others for all the right reasons, and become a smart connector, the architect of your amazing business and life. Welcome to the Smart Connector podcast. In today's episode, I interview Chiara Covone, a leadership and business coach from Stockholm in Sweden. Chiara is a former corporate high flyer who made the transition to entrepreneurship a couple of years ago, and she now works with clients across the globe to increase their productivity, motivation, and results. We talk about these topics as well as the most common issues affecting entrepreneurs and corporate executives in midlife, and how Chiara helps them achieve well-being and peak performance. Welcome, Chiara.
Thank you, Jane, for having me.
Chiara, it's great to have you as a guest. Before we go into talking about some very, very exciting and relevant topics to all entrepreneurs, I'd just like to really go a little bit deeper into who are you and where do you live right now? Where is your work? Our viewers would love to hear about you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, so I'm originally Italian from this beautiful city that is Rome, but I left Italy in 2004. I was working for Philip Morris back then, and so I moved to Switzerland. I lived 9 years in Switzerland, 2 years in Austria, and then we moved with my husband here in Sweden, just outside Stockholm, where we have been living now for the past 5 years. And I have the luxury of working from home. I've been actually working from home now for the past 4 years. And so I like to say that I work internationally in the sense that a computer is my door to the world. And working from home really makes me possible to work with people and wonderful other people from everywhere in the world.
That's brilliant. Chiara, where are most of your clients come from? Do you have a particular country where you're particularly prolific?
Yeah, I guess it's interesting because I guess my life of 9 years in Switzerland made me a big bond with that country. So a lot of my clients today are in Switzerland, even if people maybe that I haven't been socializing or working together when I was living in Switzerland. So most of them are in Switzerland, although they're not Swiss. As you probably, and also your listener know, Switzerland is a very international country. And so my clients come from Poland, from Greece, from the US, India, from South America, Brazil, and Australia. So really a very interesting mix of personality. And most of them gravitate around Switzerland. But I also have clients that are based in other countries like Denmark, India, Japan, Hong Kong, and Mexico. So yeah, luckily we always manage to find some time slot that work for everybody without having to work overnight.
Indeed. And do you have a certain sector that you specialize in?
So my background is really very much into FMCG. So I worked for 16 years for FMCG companies. So this is really the world I understand, because in my current business as a leadership coach, I want to help leaders and senior professionals to really don't look backwards, but look forward to the future. And I know and I feel that because I know that world and where they're coming from and the struggles they have been facing, because I've been facing the same struggles, it's easy for me to relate to them. Now, having said that, a lot of my clients are ex-corporate people. So people that decided to leave the corporate world to embrace a career as entrepreneurs. So I like to say, yeah, so the background is maybe FMCG, large corporations, but now living in a very different environment, which is you being your own boss, you deciding how you want to structure your day and your life and your goals. So this is the typical person, I would say, that I work with.
I come from a marketing background, so obviously I understand what FMCG stands for, but for our listeners that don't.
Yes, so fast consumer moving good. I think in the US it's also called CPG, so consumer product groups. And so it's typical products that have a high rotation, so typical products that you tend to buy on a daily basis, so as opposed to durable goods that could be a car or a fridge that you purchase, say, a little bit less frequently. So that's the world of FMCG. So really fast speed, a lot of new products, very short development cycles typically for producing your products, a lot of marketing activities, a lot of social interaction with consumers and end users. And then, of course, there is the retailer in the middle. So it's a B2C, although very rarely the brand owners talk directly to the end consumer.
Yes, so examples of FMCG companies here in the UK might be Unilever and Procter and Gamble, those people who produce the goods that we buy in supermarkets, for example.
Exactly, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's great, Chiara. So we talked before the interview about 3 areas, and I'd love to go into these in a bit more detail. The first one was productivity and time management. The second one was working with people in their 40s and 50s and the specific issues that they have, particularly when they transition from that corporate role to entrepreneurship, although I know you also coach corporate executives as well. So we'll talk about that age bracket, if you like, and what their particular issues are. And then finally, we'll talk about perfectionism, because that's something that particularly entrepreneurs really tend to suffer from. So I'd love to go into some detail on those 3 topics. So let's start off with productivity, Chiara, because that's something that you really do spend some time talking to your clients about, don't you?
Absolutely. So the thing is that because I've been working so long, even when I still was working for corporate, I had to find some systems that would get me motivated on a Monday morning. And of course, corporate world or in general, our life is made with a lot of meetings. So those tend to already occupy part of your week. But the reality is that we tend to be a bit sloppy in organizing our weeks in terms of what is it that I want to achieve. So I started testing some different planners and methods. I really started digging into what is out there. How can I be fully motivated and engaged and stick to my plans when Monday morning comes? And so I really started exploring different options, and I landed on some, and then I started perfectioning them. And I finally really found something that works wonders. And I've becoming really like a productivity machine. And this is also something that I've been testing and exploring with my clients. And I see amazing results in terms of how much more they can get done. And also, the interesting thing around productivity is the reward you feel for yourself. So, when you are arriving at the end of the week and all of the things that you promised yourself you would do, you actually have completed, that sense of gratification and satisfaction is really so important for ourselves, as we tend to beat ourselves so much up and never feel that we're good enough. And so, in that sense, by creating a system where you are intentional about what is it that I want to achieve this week, what are the 3 things that are important for me, that if I do those, a lot of the other things become irrelevant or obsolete or not necessary anymore. The trick here is really to focus on 3 things in a week, so not more than that. Actually, it's max 3 weeks. Sometimes, depending on how many appointment, how many commitment I have in the week, I might decide to just stick with 1 or 2 big thing that I really want to achieve. And those, of course, needs to be connected to your goals, right? So we have to start with setting SMART goals for yourself. So SMART, in the acronym, that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So set yourself some goals and then decide what are the activities that I need to achieve, I need to complete for me to be able to achieve that goal. And you do that with the most intelligent part of your brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, and you need to do it ahead of time. Because our brain, and we'll talk about it later when we talk about perfectionism in the 40s and 50s, but the problem is that our brain is driven by seeking pleasure, avoiding effort, and avoiding pain. Yeah, so those are the 3 things that the brain is trying to make us achieve, because from an evolutionary perspective, our brain was meant to help us survive, and making an effort for something that doesn't feel comfortable isn't relevant for survival. Our primitive brain is still stuck in the primitive age, and to be able to access our more human part of the brain, the more intelligent part of the brain, we have to think ahead of time. So this is really where the planning on a Sunday night or on a Friday night, whenever you want to decide you start planning for the next week, is so crucial. You sit with yourself, you decide the 3 things you want to accomplish that week and the activities that are required for you to do those, to achieve that goal. And the other really, really powerful thing here is that you're going to decide how long each of these activities will take. And now my clients will tell me, well, I don't know how long it's going to take. And I say, well, that's the wrong question. And I remind my clients when we were in school or in university, but you had to deliver an essay and you have to complete it within an hour. Well, miracle happened and you were actually completing that task in 1 hour. So if we're not disciplined with ourselves and deciding ahead of time how much time it will take for us to complete that task, it might take forever. And the reason it's taking forever is because you allow interactions to come in and distract you. So instead, if we decide that this activity is going to take me 1 hour or 3 hours max, and then I stick to that time, I put it in my calendar, and when the time comes, I actually stick to that time and I close all distraction. I don't look at the phone, I don't look at emails. It's really focused time, and you do it in that time. The idea is that you have that goal for the end of the week with the 3 tasks and you have the activities and you complete them on time and you feel like, oh my God, I managed to do that. So that sense of gratification, that sense also of not letting yourself down. Because the point is that when you get to the Monday morning or the Wednesday morning and you have in your calendar that activity that is going to take you 1 hour, 3 hours, whatever you have decided that you're going to invest in terms of timing, your brain will try to find all the excuses why you shouldn't do it, why you should do something else instead. And this is where we need to be aware, and this is where coaching really helps you become aware of, hold on a second, this is my primitive brain that is trying to take me out of it. That is trying to talk me out of it because, it's going to be less comfortable than sitting and drinking coffee with a friend, for instance, or do other things that are more repetitive and more automated in our brains so that require less effort versus writing a book or making those uncomfortable calls to find new clients and all of those activities that feel less comfortable and less automated. My time management approach, and the key is really focus on few things, decide how long it's going to take and put it in the calendar. And when the day comes, stick to it and achieve it. And the last thing that I want to say is that when you complete the week, review everything that you have accomplished to celebrate. The first thing you need to do is to celebrate all your achievements because that adrenaline, that feeling of satisfaction is really feeding you and preparing you for the next week to achieve, the same amount of goals or bigger things for yourself.
Wow, I love that. We so often just drift, as you said, and avoid the things that are really going to make the difference to our business. And those are the things that we need to be focusing on. So that sounds like an amazing system, Chiara. So I'd love to just go into this topic of celebration because I know that I'm guilty of this. I'm quite an action taker and I am an achiever and I think I am quite a productive person. But what I often forget to do is to actually celebrate my achievements at the end of the week. I just like, well, that's done. Now what next? So what would you say to somebody like me, for example, who just like, it's very hard. I'm very hard on myself. And I think this is a very common trait for many entrepreneurs. We're tough on ourselves and we're tough on other people as well. So, how do we actually move from that mindset to being somebody who is kind and nice to ourselves and actually recognizes our achievements?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's not an easy one because the reality is that it takes training and awareness. So the thing that I would recommend is to pay attention to it. I have my planner, which is a book that I complete digitally. I do it digitally. I'm not a very paper person. But the first question that I have every Friday or every Sunday before I start planning the week ahead is, what are you grateful for achieving this week? And I actually do that a little bit every day. So every day at the end of the day, I celebrate the little achievement that made this day so special and unique. So that I do it already on a daily basis. So I would recommend to do that very, very quickly, just 5 minutes before going to bed, to really revise what you have done today and what you can be happy about having achieved today. And then on a Friday or on a Sunday, I personally do it on a Sunday night. So on a Sunday night, you really go back and look at those pages that you filled in throughout the week, and you remind yourself, oh, look at that. I did that. I spoke with that person. I had an interview there. I did a podcast episode there. I coached this amount of people. I wrote that article. All those things that made you live your values, that made you live your values, that made you live your goals, those are really important. And by forcing it onto yourself on a written page, you can't skip it. So I'm a big believer that you have to have it written somewhere so that you don't forget it. Some people use reminders that pop up on their iPads or on their phone. So that's also another way. It doesn't work as effective for me, but I know that for other people, for some people, it does work. So you could try something like that. The other thing is also what I do is that I work with quarterly goals. And quarterly goals are what I can achieve in the next 90 days.
Mm.
And there I already, when I prepare the goal, at the bottom of the page, I write how I'm going to celebrate having achieved that goal. And then I really start thinking around, oh, I could do for a staycation with my husband in that beautiful hotel in the south of Stockholm. And we can just take 48 hours for ourselves and leave the kids with the grandparents. Or I could open that Chateau Margaux bottle that we have there, waiting for that special occasion to be opened. So I really put those celebration opportunities at the moment of setting the goal, which is also
Mm.
really a powerful way. And it motivates you to achieve that goal as well.
I love that. I think that's such a good idea. Is it really about the relationship that you have with yourself as well? Because while you were talking, I was thinking about what a good friend would say if they were looking over your shoulder and they might say, look at what you've done this week. You've done so well. You've done this, you've done that. Pat yourself on the back. But we so rarely actually do that for ourselves. So is it just about becoming a better friend to ourselves as well?
Absolutely. And in fact, the system that I was talking also before is this honoring commitment to ourselves. We need to treat meetings that we have with ourselves like meeting with that we have with other people. We don't call last minute and say, sorry, I can't make that meeting. But why do we do it with ourselves? So we are often negligent of treating ourselves as good as we treat some other people. And the other really important principle that I like to highlight here, but also that I do with my clients, is that scarcity, this idea of I'm never good enough, I'll be celebrating when I get there. That we need to be careful with that because we miss to celebrate the moments, each moment. So it is important, of course, to have a bigger reward at the end of the road, but to celebrate every moment and to stay in the moment here now as we are living today, it's so important because scarcity, as I said, doesn't motivate us. If we feel like, oh, I'm not good enough, or I haven't done enough, I'm still behind my targets, those mindset, those feelings don't bring us any good action, right? If you think of that, what action would come out of that place? It's just demotivating, it's just frustrating, you're beating yourself up versus enjoying where you are and really appreciating yourself, reminding yourself how good you are, how complete you are, and then from that place desire to do more, right? To bring more value to this world. But this is really the key for me. Our work is about bringing value to the world. It's not about proving our worth. It's not about proving to ourselves that we can do things because that is the scarcity mindset. So be in the moment, enjoy yourself as you are, complete today, and enjoy bringing this value to the world, produce and have an impact with your work.
And of course, part of the value that we bring to the world is showing up as the best version of ourselves, isn't it, Chiara?
Exactly, absolutely, definitely.
Wow. Well, I love that conversation. I could talk about that for the rest of the podcast, but I have promised to visit some other topics. So let's move on and talk about this issue of perfectionism because I again, I think that it is very, very common amongst entrepreneurs to suffer from wanting things to be perfect. And I've actually been bumping up against that myself because I'm creating some new assets at the moment. I'm in the middle of creating a course and a mastermind, and I want it to be so good and I want it to be perfect. And sometimes I do catch myself thinking, you know what? I've been sitting here for the last half an hour just thinking about these few sentences. And really, that's not ideal because what I need to do is just move fast and accept things being imperfect because that's how I get things done. And then we can always get perfect later. So I'd love to hear your take on perfectionism.
Yes, so it's really linked to things we've spoken earlier. So the first thing is that it's our brain that likes to slow us down. So perfectionism is an incredible, powerful tool that works against us because it slows us down. And then so I like to challenge ourselves thinking, what is perfectionism? And as we spoke also before, the beginning of the podcast, I have also been a victim of perfectionism. We're all human beings, and perfectionism is a threat that is on us at every stage in our life. But perfectionism tends to slow us down because we feel that in this way we can extend and procrastinate how we show up in the world. I'm not going to publish that article until it's perfect. But what is perfect? Perfect for whom? Perfectionism and something perfect doesn't exist. And so the first thing that goes back to also those time blocks that I work with is that I encourage both myself and my clients to aim for a B minus, yeah, not for an A plus, not for the top perfection, but aim for something that is good enough. It shouldn't be a sloppy thing full of mistakes, but it shouldn't be perfect either, right? So something that is good enough that you can feel like, yes, that's fine. And as you said correctly, you can always refine later on. But giving yourself that time and that permission to make something imperfect and vulnerable and yet authentic in you, right? As we show up in our day, we never are perfect when we show up in our conversations spontaneously with people. So why would we want to polish ourselves up for things that go out in a different manner? So clearly is about being aware of, I'm being the perfectionist again. I'm beating myself again up for not being good enough. And we talk a lot about Brené Brown talks about the gremlins in her book,
Mm.
The Gifts of Imperfection. And bringing those gremlins to the light makes them die. So talking about all the gremlins we have, it's so powerful. Being aware and speaking openly about it, writing about them, or speaking to our friends about it, it's really a powerful way to overcome that temptation to be perfectionist that slows us really down.
Mm. So perfectionism and productivity, they've actually got a lot to do with one another, haven't
Yes,
they,
indeed,
Chiara?
absolutely. They really live with each other.
So basically, drop the perfection and get more productive.
Right, exactly, exactly. Because you will, if you aim for perfectionism, you will never get anything done because you will always find something that you want to polish or revise. But the reality is that is also very much linked to this primitive brain that wants to keep you safe. Because the question that you need to ask yourself is, what is the worst thing that can happen? Sometimes I send newsletter to my subscribers, and I remember actually the first newsletter that I sent, I got two emails back that I had a typo on a word that meant something else, that it wasn't supposed to mean that. And I felt so ashamed. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I read it three times. How is it possible that I missed that typo? And the reality is that I felt ashamed, right? And so what? I showed up, I put myself out there, and I got something back that made me feel a little embarrassed. And you live with that and you grow from that. You perfect yourself, you improve yourself for next time. But at least you showed up. If I didn't send that email and waited until it was perfect, it would have never reached those people. And I wouldn't have brought value to those people with my content.
Mm. Do you think one of the sources of discontent amongst successful people is because as they become more successful, they upgrade the people that they compare themselves to?
Yeah, definitely. You raise the bar continuously, right? And that is the thing again of not celebrating who you are and what you are. And I was listening to this interview of this lady that talks about the difference between self-esteem and self-compassion. So self-esteem is really linked to your desire and need to prove yourself, and it goes up and down. So when you do good thing, then you can praise yourself, but when you do not as good things, you're beating yourself up. So this self-esteem, so the professionals you were referring to are have the high demand of continuously feeding the self-esteem by proving themselves against higher targets. And that is a really scarcity mindset. You don't need to prove your worth. You are complete as you are. You can perform better, you can grow as a human being, you can evolve, but you will never arrive. And that's the purpose of life. You continuously need to evolve, but you can't wait to arrive there to be happy, because you will never be happy. That destination is never going to be at arm reach. You're always going to set new goals. So the power here is to, again, be in the moment and enjoying who you are today as you are with all the things you have around you, and to really be aware of that scarcity mindset that you have if you don't feel enough today.
I love this. What a great conversation we're having, Chiara, and I'm sure that our listeners will also really enjoy it as well. So let's move on to people in their 40s and 50s. So I know that you coach entrepreneurs, obviously, and also people in corporate life. What happens in midlife? Because we were talking beforehand that this is the time in life where we've still got maybe 20, 30 years ahead of us, but we're past that early stage of striving. We probably achieved something in our lives. I would imagine the people that you work with are usually fairly successful. So what questions and issues come up for them at that particular stage in life?
Yeah, so this is a really fascinating subject. So when we are in our teens, in our 20s, we are continuously having a target ahead of us in terms of who do we want to be? We ask this question to ourselves, who do we want to be? So you start studying, you get a job, you might find a partner. If you want kids, you have kids, you buy a house, and there is always momentum. You're always looking for defining who you want to be, and you want to move. But then, when you have checked all these boxes, you start defining yourself, but what you have done. So instead of looking forward to your future, you start turning the back to your future, and you start looking backwards, and you start defining yourself by what you have done. And that is the reality, but it doesn't bring you progress. And that's really where the confusion and the frustration comes, because you feel like, I have achieved everything. What's next for me? Who am I? And so I encourage people to turn again, to turn to your front, to look forward, because you do have 30, 40 years ahead of you in which you are going to be active in your life, doing things, being a father, a grandfather, whatever, being a human, a citizen in your community. And so asking yourself the question every day, who do I want to be? What are my values today? And what value driven goals do I want to set for myself that I want to live for the next 20 years? And then in 20 years' time, I might revise them again. So here's the thing of really challenging this mindset that you are who you are. And this is really the power of coaching versus psychotherapy, for example. So psychotherapy looks at your past. Coaching looks at your future. Everything that you've done until today doesn't determine at all who you're going to be tomorrow. And the frustration is that we are instead anchoring ourselves on our past, on the things that we have done. And there is a lot of quotes that you find these days on the internet that says, whatever brought you here, whatever you've done brought you here. But if you want to go to a different place tomorrow, you have to make changes. And here we go
Mm.
back to our primitive brain that says, change? Are you crazy? No, 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 no change. We're old. You're too old for that. Yeah, this little subconscious voice that protects us and tells us you can't change your career, you can't start all over, you can't redecide, you have taken a decision, now you're stuck. This is all this internal voice that talks to us and that tries to protect us. So I don't say that we should ignore it, but do we want to entertain those thoughts? We do have 60,000 thoughts per day. We don't need to entertain them all, right? We
Mm.
don't have the capacity to entertain them all. So having the choice of, all right, I hear your brain, what you're saying. I still want to achieve things. I mean, I know people that in their 70s that started, they decided to become life coaches. And,
Mm.
and that's fantastic because you have the energy. And again, there is this self-talk like where you can't learn anything. You only can learn things when you're in your 20s. That's not true. I learned Swedish 5 years ago. I speak fluent Swedish. I didn't know Swedish until 5 years ago, but I was committed to learn a new language and I just stick to it. I really embrace this idea that anything is possible if we decide that we can. So really working on your mindset, stop looking backwards, turn your back to your backwards. Be grateful for what you have achieved. Don't deny anything that you've done in the past, but live excited and decide again for yourself today. Who do you want to be? What do you want to do? What are your values? What are your goals?
That's, well, it's absolutely fascinating. This is one of the topics that I love the most. And I actually studied a few years ago with a guy called John DeMartini,
Mm-hmm.
who is a global expert on values, really. So I really learned at that particular time that our values and our priorities are changing constantly throughout our lives, and we do have to constantly redefine ourselves in order to honor those. But I think what tends to happen is too many of us get into this place where we might feel as though we want to redefine ourselves and strive for a new goal, but then we are surrounded by people. And I think this is particularly common perhaps in families who want to define us by our past. Do you find that your clients have that issue, Chiara?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is really the work that I do with my clients, talking about relationship and the impact that the surrounding has on you. Because this is again a way to find excuses for that hold you back. These are the limiting beliefs that we have. My partner wouldn't support me, or my family. Everybody will try to talk you out of it. Are you crazy? What, leaving your safe corporate job to start a career from scratch? You're too old for that. So it's not only that internal voice, but it's also the environment around you, the people around you that are like your primitive brain. They want to protect you, and they're doing it with all the good intentions of the world. But you need to listen to yourself and what is true to yourself. Now, I coach a lot of people not to leave corporate world for the wrong reasons, because escaping from somewhere is never a good idea. You first need to be happy in the place you are before taking a step outwards. Otherwise, you're just going to bring your misery from one place to the next. So it's
Mm.
really important that we don't leave corporate because we think like, I'm tired of this politics and I want to go into being my own boss, because you're completely underestimating the effort that you will need to put into being your own boss. So I think it's very important that we are cautious around what is it that we really want. And what you said before, it's so important because I really don't believe that so many people do the exercise of writing down what are your values, what is driving you, and be very conscious about it and very unapologetic, because when you do the exercise of the values, sometimes you will feel that the answers you get are what society expects you to say. Oh, my family is the most important thing in my world. I need to fight hunger in Africa is very important, because this is what society tells us that we need to say, we want to say. But if you're really authentic for yourself and you ask yourself the questions, what do you want to be remembered for? What is your legacy? What are you going to leave as a legacy in this world? Then you start really thinking about, what can I bring to this world? What do I want to, how do I want to live my values and my life in the next 3 5 years, before I, as I say, you revise them, because those values will change depending on your evolution. So as you evolve as a person, your values will also change. But doing that exercise, and then knowing that whenever you're going to decide a new goal, your brain is going to try to talk you out of it. It's going to find all the reason of this world why it's a really bad idea to start something new and to take those risks. And the brain, as we said, avoids risks, minimize effort, and just seek pleasure. Yeah. So seeking pleasure is connected to things you've done in the past that your brain can do automatically. It's a known path. Doing things new are very scary. But what is scare? What is fear? What is the worst thing that can happen? Because in the past it was like we had to avoid being eaten from by a tiger or by a lion. But today, often fear is just a feeling.
Indeed. I think people fear disapproval, and I've noticed in particular with people that have families, I think really, really struggle to disentangle themselves and their own feelings and desires from the desires of their family, because particularly I think conscientious parents, they want everybody to be happy. They want their children to be happy. They want their spouse to be happy if they're married. And sometimes their own needs get submerged, and it doesn't even matter what their values are. I think in some instances people are then they're actually thinking, operating from a place of their own agenda. So sometimes, yes, they do want to be supportive, but then they're just trying to protect their
Hmm.
spouse or whoever. Sometimes they're actively thinking, you know what, I don't feel comfortable with somebody this close to me rocking the boat and changing my life. I would rather have things the same way. So therefore they will often try and talk them out of change, because it's in their interest and
Yeah.
it's their values. Do you find that you get that as well?
Absolutely. And this is why I have this mantra that says, choose discomfort over resentment. And it's
Mm,
something that we need to remind ourselves all the time,
yes.
because it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel you're going to have to embrace disapproval from others. And so what? Is it better
Mm,
to look at yourself in 20 years and regret not having done things? So this is really the question, and the thing you, and I mean, there is no right or wrong, right? There isn't. Everybody needs to decide for themselves. But what I always say is, make sure you like the reason why you're deciding certain things, and stick
mm.
to it. Don't go back into thinking over it again, because that's also what happens with us humans.
Yeah.
We go back and forth on the same topic, and that slows us tremendously down, right? So once you really decide something, what reason we're giving to ourselves why we're taking that decision, and stick to it.
Mm. And do you think that we teach others how to treat us, Chiara? So, for example, if you are with somebody who's, let's say, less than supportive, let's say you're a corporate executive in your 40s and 50s, you want to leave your job, you really want to start up your own business, it's been your dream for some time, but your spouse is very resistant because they've become dependent on your income and they don't want to rock the boat and they're not really with you on your journey. Do you think in that particular instance that you should just be firm, you should stand in your value, and you should basically just say, well, this is important to me, this is what I want? Or would you advise the person that you're working with to do something different?
I think it's very important then that we are aware that nothing is certain. That, and coronavirus made us realize that more than in other instances. But having a safe job doesn't exist. That's an illusion. So
Yes.
we're completely delusional if we believe that because you're in your 40s and your 50s and you don't want to leave your job because you're fearful of what's happening on the other side. That's not a good reason to stay, right?
Indeed.
Because you might be furloughed or you might be asked to leave and take a pre-retirement tomorrow. So I think is this. So there is two things here. So it's first of all realizing that uncertainty is the only certainty. Nothing is changeable, and things that look stable could become very unstable in the turn of the night. And the other thing is that we have this thing called confirmation bias. So if we are unsure about something, and our brain will look for all the evidence why this is a bad idea. And on all the things that the partner will say, you will only pick up on those things that will confirm your fear. Versus if you're thinking really convinced, everybody wants me to leave this job, already very supportive, your brain will look for all the evidence why everybody else is supportive. So our brain plays so many tricks with us. And it's just about being aware that if you have a thought, your brain will try to confirm all the thought with all the evidence around it from everybody. And
Mm.
if you change that thought, it's going to also be true. So all the evidence will all of a sudden pop up. It's really interesting, but it's really about being aware and being a bit cautious. So stick to the decision, decide if that's really something you want. Why do you want that? Ask for your why. There is this guy, Dean Graziosi, I think it's his name, that has
Yeah.
this 7 level of whys.
Mm.
Before doing something, asking yourself 7 times, and why is that important? And I don't know if you've done this exercise, but it's pretty intense because the first two whys, they're pretty easy. But when you start getting to the fourth and the fifth, it becomes quite tricky. But it's so
Mm.
powerful,
Yes.
particularly when it comes to entrepreneurship. Having our why so deep rooted in our soul makes us motivated much more than if we didn't have it. Because all the time that you have to embrace something uncomfortable, that you have to do something that you would rather avoid, go back to that why that you have written somewhere, and your energy and your enthusiasm will come back in another second.
Indeed. I think that's a very, very important point. And I think the why is something that we always have to be connected with, don't you, Chiara?
Yes, absolutely. And it's so fascinating to get to know ourselves by asking those questions, because the reality is that sometimes we want to be moved by bigger purpose around others, and the first whys tend to be very altruistic. But the reality is that you can only do something if it makes you feel good. And sometimes, I mean, when you read that book from Dean Graziosi, you really find that sometimes the reason of people might come from a place of struggle, and that's okay. That it doesn't need to be always a noble why. You can write the noble why on your billboard or on your website, but deep inside, know which one is your real why, and don't be ashamed from it. Just live it and go back to it anytime, every time you are feeling a bit down or losing
Mm.
motivation.
I tend to think of the why as like the North Star because we always have decisions, don't we? That every day we have to, forks in the road, we have to decide whether to go this way or that way. And sometimes it's to do with people and relationships, and sometimes it's to do with how we spend our time and how much well being we help ourselves to, or how much work we do, how much rest we have. And I personally think having that why and being deeply connected with it just makes decision making easy. Would you agree?
I totally agree with you. Absolutely. And this is why we're going back to the time management piece. Every time you have a task, I like to ask myself, why am I even bothering with this? What is it the purpose? Because the reality is that if you have things that are just occupying your time and you don't even know why you're doing, the chances that you're gonna complete those things are very thin. Or even if you do them, you will do it with the wrong attitude and the results might be mediocre as well. So if you really look at your task and understand what is it the results that is going to produce this task. Even something so silly like going shopping. I was coaching a client the other day and she's like, oh, I need to go shopping. And I feel like, but look at it from a different perspective. Why are you going shopping? What is the purpose of having those ingredients at home? Right? Because if you think about it, I do it because I want to eat a delicious meal and have something to indulge myself when I'm cooking dinner. That why makes the activity, the annoying activity having to go to a grocery shop and buy your produce and your things much more pleasant, because there is a why attached to it. And this is again why it is so important that we put those things in our calendar so we reduce the amount of decision we need to take, because otherwise it's so much time draining and effort draining if we every day need to decide also on the smallest things, versus if you already have it all on your calendar and you just check, okay, what was it that I was supposed to do now at 10? All right, let's do it. What was it that I was supposed to do now at 11? And this is also why it's so empowering to do this download of all the things you want to do on a Sunday night. So you empty your brain, you empty that sense of fatigue, a sense of tiredness, of all the things you need to hold space for in your head, and write them down, put them in your calendar so that it's taken care of and you can strike them off from your list and know that they will be taken care of. You will be doing them.
Well, Chiara, it's been such a pleasure to speak to you today. What amazing conversation we've had. And I'd just like to finish by asking you to tell our listeners how they could get in touch with you.
Thank you, Jane. It was a really nice conversation. So, to get in touch with me, they can go to my website, which is chiaracovone.com, as in ChiaraCovone.com. I'm sure you will put it in the show notes, so it's going to be easier for people to find it. And otherwise, on LinkedIn, I'll be very happy to take any questions and bring this conversation forward. I hope it was inspiring and give some food for thoughts.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much again for joining us, Chiara, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Connector podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not head over to janebayler.com and order a copy of my free report on building your personal brand. I'd love to connect with you on social media. And finally, don't forget to like and subscribe to my podcast so that you never miss a show. Thanks for listening in, and see you soon.